Hey, this is the Coach Ed Podcast. I am Ed Wietholder. You can track me down at strengthfitnessandspeed.com. Hello, this is episode 4 of the Coach Ed Podcast. Today we have a very special guest, Dr. Jake Wietholder. Welcome aboard, Jake.
Thanks for having me, Dad.
Absolutely, man. So, what I want to know, and what some other people want to know when they look at your background and such, what makes your physical therapy approach different than others that would make someone want to see you versus someone else?
So my practice is a little bit different in the sense in that I take cash. I'm not an insurance-based model. I think I can treat more of the whole person, if you will. You're not limited by one specific body part or anything of that nature. I kind of take a little more of an athletic lens through it. Not that that has to always be the case, but I kind of view it as someone trying to get back to something, a sport, an activity, something to that effect. Maybe less about just trying to rehab the piece itself, although that is important.
Gotcha. So just to be clear on that, you treat non-athletes as well. Everyone's an athlete, but you also treat others that aren't necessarily playing sports right now. Is that correct?
Yeah, I can treat just about anyone. I do prefer someone trying to get back to something important. I'm usually more of like a once a week type of thing. Come see me for the one day, the one session, any manual treatments you need, things of that. I can show you kind of how it's done. And then I give you some homework to do. And as provided you do that religiously, I think it's maybe a better model than the traditional insurance-based mechanism.
Homework, very important, 100%, absolutely. Let me ask you something else, Jake. You're the head performance coach at Strength, Fitness, and Speed. What role does your physical therapy knowledge play in training an athlete who's healthy, who's at some point in his athletic career? How does that help you out, or how does that work in?
I think just learning more of the intricacies of the body, all the little specific muscles that might benefit by getting a little bit of work in before you do heavy sets, anything of that nature, more your traditional compound lifts. Just looking at, like, in terms of, like, say, a knee injury or something that are trying to avoid the likelihood of getting a knee injury, just kind of learning landings, taking that a little more seriously than I once did. And just kind of looking at it from how can we mechanically be best.
I certainly try to stress that as well. It seems like, for instance, if you're doing a plyometric jump or broad jump or anything of that nature, I stress at the beginning to athletes that I work with that the end part of this, the landing, is every bit, if not more important than the takeoff. I tell them we're working your brakes, and they say, brakes? Yes, brakes are important. So yeah, it's just another interesting spin from that. This next question, Jake, this is a lot of times, people roll an ankle or they tweak their knee and they're down for PT. What can these people do in the interim? I mean, a lot of folks just want to shut down, which doesn't make a damn bit of sense. In your opinion, what can be done during times of injury so athletes don't lose too much ground?
So I think within reason, some graded exposure to that particular joint, like say it's an ankle sprain. Mm-hmm. I think it's best not to just let it sit. Obviously, you can't do anything crazy, change of direction-wise or anything like that. But training everything up the chain too. You can isolate the quad, you can isolate hamstring, glute, work the upper body, of course, and work the other side to a little extent. I don't think the idea is to go crazy on the other side, but to kind of stimulate the other side. There's some mirroring effect that occurs with training the right side of the body. If the left is injured, there is some benefit to that.
So you're saying there's some carryover to the healthy limb, or to the injured limb, even if you're training the healthy side.
Yeah, there is some data to support that. It is useful to train that unaffected side. Again, just looking at it from my perspective, you don't have to go berserk with it or anything, sure. but training it up a little so there is some mirroring to help the nerve stimulate that opposite side as well.
Nice. Excellent. I just want to shift gears here a little bit. Interesting. Earlier today, it hasn't jumped out on Twitter yet, but I put out a comment that asks an athlete or a person that's not playing sports, where are you at physically now compared to exactly 1 year ago today? And I said, if you're not better and your training is adequate, and we're going to assume it's adequate, then you have to look towards recovery. So I guess that leads into what I wanted to ask you. What's your feelings about recovery in different modalities and how it can benefit athletes? It's such a boring topic, like, oh, recovery. Like, I was frothing at the mouth, laying in bed, like, I'm going to get the best sleep in the world. I'm going to, just not in people's nature. So if you could elaborate on recovery, that'd be great.
Well, I definitely think overtraining is a thing. Playing your sport every day is great, but I think there is a cost to that sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
You definitely need some type of just general rest thrown in there. Playing every day is a lot. I think the sleep thing, I think I made a post on this a little while back.
Mm-hmm.
Just truly trying to get 8 hours of sleep. Putting the phone down at night, trying not to be too distracted, not doing too much as you kind of wind down, have a good routine for that.
Mm-hmm.
That is important. In terms of some of the training stuff you can maybe do, I think isometric holds of any variety, kind of like isolating a joint, is kind of a good way to not, cause a ton of friction at the joint itself, but just still be able to kind of stimulate muscle groups without like annihilating them.
Nice.
So I think that's a good mechanism. And then some mobility work, I think, is another good thing. If you train through adequate range of motion and everything, that you probably don't need a ton, but I think there is a time and a place to try to gain a little bit more mobility, and that can come at a time when you're trying to get a little bit of like active recovery, if you will.
Nice. That's just an interesting spin from that. When you talked about isometrics, they used to be extremely popular. There was a strength coach who's now since passed away. His name was Bill Starr. He wrote a book in the 70s called Only the Strong Survive. And he would apply isometric holds at different spots in the power rack to improve certain portions of a lift. He was also, I believe he was a strength coach at Johns Hopkins for several sports. So his hope was to create strength at different, I believe, you would know the answer to this better than I. There's a carryover if you're exerting an isometric hold at a certain angle at a given joint. There's a little bit of carryover around that angle. Is that accurate? Or am I a little bit off with that?
No, I would say it's correct. There's a performance benefit, I think, to some isometric movements. Absolutely, like the amortization phase, kind of between
Gotcha.
The concentric and eccentric. And then from like a tendon perspective, I believe that when you put force through a tendon, it tends to only run through the healthiest part.
Mm-hmm.
And not that an athlete can sense that, and I know this part of my tendon is this, and this part of my tendon is that.
Right.
But there are some creep and stress properties that kind of like force all of the tendon to work when you hold a prolonged pose.
I see.
Versus just doing the typical concentric, eccentric movement.
Gotcha.
Through the range of motion.
So from like a, say for instance, you had like a competitive power lifter and he wanted to work a certain range in the power rack, that would be a way for him to reduce friction and maybe decrease the workload on a given joint at a certain part of his training. Something along those lines.
Yeah,
while still having a load placed on the ligament.
I would say absolutely. I think there's that performance aspect and recovery aspect to that for sure. Powerlifting, great example of using that to your advantage on a lower intensity day or something of that,
gotcha.
That nature.
I understand. Well, Jake, I appreciate you getting on the podcast today. That was very enlightening. You taught me some things today as well. I appreciate you coming, and we're certainly going to do this again on a variety of topics.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it, Dad. Honored to be the first guest.
Excellent. Well done, Jake.